Okay, so now that we have set up what Europe is like uh, right before the Renaissance, we can move forward and to look at the changes that come from the Renaissance and really how it transforms Europe almost completely. Now, to begin with, we will look at the beginnings and the overarching ideals of the Renaissance. And really, you can't talk about the Renaissance without talking about how the Italian states really influenced the Renaissance, beginning with Florence. Now, Florence is one of the most important cities in the Renaissance and is the cradle of the Renaissance, mainly because of its importance um, as a merchant hub. The city of Florence is right on the Mediterranean, has rivers that lead to the Mediterranean that lead to a lot of trading, and because of this uh, trade base, they were able to move goods and move services throughout Europe during the Crusades. While the rest of Europe was spending money, the people of Florence and other Italian city states are taking money and building ships for the Crusaders. And once the Crusades are over, they continue to build ships in order to continue to trade throughout the Mediterranean. So that's one of the reasons why Florence and other cities become so important to the Renaissance. Another reason why this happens is because the city of Florence, the city of Venice, Genoa, all these different cities are sort of removed from Europe, from the rest of Europe. They can escape from the plague, from all these political happenings in Europe, all the unrest. There are mountains that the Swiss Alps protect most of the Italian peninsula from the rest of continental Europe, and so it's sort of removed away from it. And then finally, Rome is right there. The Vatican is right there. So there's a lot of learning, a lot of movement of information going on through the Italian states, and these people are in the Italian states are used to being the center of the world. They still have this memory of Rome, this sort of idea that the Byzantine Empire, the Roman Empire, is still sort of connected to them. They're still trading with the Byzantine Empire through the Mediterranean. So, Florence, the other Italian states are uniquely set to spread out the message, to spread out and make a lot of money through trade and through the technological advances that come from the Renaissance. And because of the ideas of Florence, because of the tradition of being Romans, having a lot of education, a lot of past worth, as they have a lot of history and a lot of reverence for the past. They have a lot of high regard for human worth and for the individual. They begin to see that this ideal of human worth in the individual leads to a new social ideal of the well-rounded personality. Okay, the more money that merchants begin to make, the more that they try to better themselves. And basically, this is sort of a one-upsmanship. I know more than you do. I can paint better than you. I can write better than you. I am such a well-rounded personality. I can do everything. And so this social ideal of being a much better rounded personality is known as a Renaissance man nowadays. Basically, being able to be well versed in philosophy, well versed in science, being good at athletics, while at the same time being a very compassionate person, a very romantic person, things like that. So this whole idea of the um, the well-rounded personality comes through Florence, comes through their learning, through their history, and so they begin to spread this ideal about the ideas of the philosophers begin to rise up and begin to create this new ideal. Because once the people of Florence, the merchant class of Florence, begins to make a lot of money, they become patrons of the arts. That's another one-upsmanship on people, is the fact that you can basically, you don't have to be the best thinker. You can pay the best thinker to think for you. You can be the patron of a well-renowned artist or philosopher, and so they begin to pour money into new philosophies, and a lot of these new philosophies begin um, to look at the past and look at what people used to think about, and so there is this focus on people. There is a focus on the everyday person. Humanism is what it's called, and humanism begins to take this idea of that we're not really focused so much on the otherworldly. We're not focused so much on what happens after we die, or or we're not so focused so much on the divine. Instead, we are focusing on humanity, focusing on what needs to be preserved, and that is the people. And you can see in things like this painting, which we'll go over a lot more in class, that humanism definitely begins to show people more as they are, and people more as they really want to be. And so this humanism at first is just focused on the aristocrats, but as the money begins to flow, as the city states become richer, artists begin to look more at everyday life. They begin to look at all sorts of social classes, and they begin to look at everybody as a real human being, instead of being this idealized Romanesque figure or this very stilted Byzantine figure, which we'll look at in a second. Instead, everybody begins to look at like themselves, and all social classes uh, are really celebrated. So this idea of humanism, focusing on people, not focusing so much on the ethereal or the divine, begins to shape the Renaissance ideas. It begins to shape the way that people look at humanity as a whole. And so this humanism begins to dig deeper into what the origins of philosophy are, the origins of the way that people are, that people are have worth, and that brings across the rebirth of classical antiquity. So they begin to look at the Greek. The Greek is a lot easier language, a lot more lively language. It is a lot better um, it's a lot easier to interpret Greek for the masses as opposed to strict medieval Latin. If anybody has ever taken Latin courses, knows how to speak Latin or read Latin, really, it's not a spoken language, knows how stilted it is, knows how strict the rules are, and how just how boring Latin can be, especially in the context of literature and the context of the spoken word. And so there is this rejection of medieval Latin, and instead going back to the Greek, bringing that in, and then later on further rejecting medieval Latin and starting to write things in their own languages. And so this idea that everything has to be done in Latin, that Latin is the only language that really matters, begins to be pushed to the side, and different languages are brought out. So, like I said, this is the recovery of Greek, not only the Greek language, but also Greek philosophy, Greek architecture, Greek ideas. And, the Greeks were some of the best philosophers in the day. They were also some of the best archivists and historians that brought in a lot of learning from outside of the Greek world. And so a lot of this is recaptured. This rebirth, this Renaissance is this rebirth of classical antiquity, going back back into European history and bringing out some of the ideas that have been lost in this um, sort of rigidity that medieval thought brought, and making it much more accessible to the masses. And so, with those ideals of humanism and bringing back classical Greek and antiquity, you start seeing the change in art. You start seeing this idea of naturalism becoming an end of itself. So if you look at these two paintings, you see the search for beauty and godliness is in life itself. So here you have two different paintings of the Virgin Mary with Jesus. On the left, you have a what is known as Byzantine art, medieval art of the mother and child, and then on the right you have a medieval painting, or excuse me, a Renaissance painting of the mother and child. And as you can see, there is a vast difference between these two. They're looking for beauty and godliness in life now, as opposed to beforehand, where the divine was all that mattered. I mean, if you look at these paintings, we'll go over this more in class, but if you look at these paintings, they're basically the same thing, but they convey two different meanings. One of those meanings on the left, this Byzantine artwork, is the fact that the only thing that matters is Jesus and Mary. There's no background, there's nothing, there's just Jesus and Mary. And then on the right, you could see that you can see that Jesus and Mary are in, they are not in the Middle East. In fact, this is probably the estate of the person who commissioned this painting. So, you see a lot of beauty, you see a lot of godliness, you see a lot of the natural world interacting with the divine. So it's not just about God. It's not just about Jesus. It is also about humanity. It is also about the way that the world looks. And so, in this search for beauty and godliness in life, you have two different developments that happen in Renaissance art. The two major developments. There are minor developments such as subliminal messages, such as little jokes that are thrown into the Renaissance paintings, such as the Sistine Chapel, which the which God is, basically the human brain giving birth to Adam. So that we'll discuss. Like I said, we'll discuss that more in class. So the two major developments are, number one, the technical side of the painting, the laws of perspective and geometrical organization of outdoor space and light. Playing with paint, playing with perspective, looking at looking at the world in three dimensions and trying to replicate two-dimensional space and making it look three-dimensional. If you look here, you see the Last Supper by Leonardo da Vinci. It is a fresco painted on the wall. I don't think he ever really meant for it to last as long as it did. He wanted it to be a exercise in the way things are. So if you look at this overlay on it, all your eye lines are drawn towards the middle. Everything is made to look at the middle. So you are looking here, no matter where your eyes are, they're always going to move towards the center, move towards Jesus in the middle. All the lines are made to move towards the middle. This is something that was a new perspective, a new type of painting. If you look if you look in the sides, you see those different black squares are all sort of tapering downward. The grates up top sort of move forward. So you see there's a lot of movement in this painting. And speaking of movement, that's the other big part, is the investigation of movement and anatomical structure. Like I said, the Renaissance ideals was moving away from Latin and And in that regard, you're also moving away from Romanesque architecture, or excuse me, sculpture, which is all about, the perfect form. Instead, you are looking at people the way that they are, or people as the way that you want them to be. Here you have two different statues. Number one is, or at the top is Donatello's David, and down underneath him is Michelangelo's David. Two of the same, two sculptures that are looking at the same person, and one of them, is portraying David as a much younger boy, almost feminine. He's very, very lively. And then down, Michelangelo paints David as more of a basically a jock. And so you have these different, but you can see movement. You can see that they look like real people. They look less like idealized versions and more like what human beings would actually look at. So you're looking at humanity as it is, not as it should be, not this idealness. Instead, you're looking at humanity in the best, in its purest form. And so Renaissance art is looking at the natural world. It's looking at the at human beings as they are, not really looking at the divine. And it is naturally changing, going through, starting with the greats in um, the Italian city states, the four artistic giants that we all know of: Leonardo da Vinci, Raphael, Michelangelo, and Donatello. All of these greats, Leonardo, Raphael, and Michelangelo, are sometimes seen as the trinity of the Renaissance period. And Donatello came a little bit earlier, and he's seen as more of the natural. As the father of natural sculpture. So these are the four giants of the Renaissance period. If there's nothing else that know that these four men are actually, yes, the epitome of Renaissance art. And so, outside of the artistic Renaissance, you also have the intellectual Renaissance. Continue to talk about humanism. Um, know that humanism is based on the study of Greek and Roman works, so literature and philosophy of uh, Greece and Rome were instrumental in developing the Renaissance. So looking back at all the old the philosophy that came before it, and then intellectuals basically had a duty to live an active life. Intellectuals were supposed to debate each other. Intellectuals were supposed to write constantly. Intellectuals were supposed to find someone, a patron, to uh, basically either teach their kids or to give them money to write. So intellectuals were out there actually getting in and creating great works and being a part of the intellectual community. And so you have this community of intellectuals that are looking for ways to make money or to uh, disseminate their knowledge. And who has a lot of money? But the church. And so the church begins to hire patrons of art and philosophy and literature, becomes to become patrons of philosophy and literature and art. And they begin to adopt these humanistic ideals. They begin to edit philosophies and literary works. They begin to dictate what is painted, what sculptures are made. And so the church begins to adopt these humanistic ideals. They begin to mix all of these classical ideas with church thought. Of course, human beings have worth. God created humanity. Of course, nature is beautiful. God created nature. So all of these ideals begin to mix. Basically, the church interjects God into classical Greek and Roman philosophy, and so these ideas begin to mix with one another, and then not only that, but Latin and the vernacular are mixed, and so the language of the people is encouraged to be used along with Latin, with classical medieval Latin. So Latin is for the church. Latin is for uh, the learned peoples, and the vernacular is actually encouraged to be used by the people. A common language is encouraged to be used, and so prayers and things outside of church are acceptable in other languages. But the Catholic Mass is always to be in Latin, and it is that way until the 1960s, so into the 20th century. But the church does adapt with the times. They have the money. They are in trouble. No one's listening to them, and so they make themselves one of the most one of the most important patrons of the arts and of philosophy and literature, and that allows them um, to uh, to change some of this humanistic thought and make it more of a Christian humanism. And so all of these ideas begin to spread throughout Europe because of the technological breakthroughs. So, luckily for the church, they're able to get in, and then their ideas begin to spread through. And so these technological breakthroughs include the Gutenberg press. The Gutenberg press is a movable type press. So basically, you have all of these letters, you put them in backwards, grab some ink, basically bags of ink with that, but it's just like making a stamp. So you put ink over all these letters, move the letters underneath a piece of paper, and then just press the paper into the ink until the ink completely saturates the paper and creates a copy. And at the beginning, early Renaissance, a lot of this is hand done, and later on, you're going to have much more um, mass produced works, literary works, most notably the Bible, written into different languages, not just Latin, but in Spanish, English, German, etc. So you're going to see the Bible spread out more to the people and be in the language that the people can actually read. There's one thing to note, though, when you start talking about the Gutenberg press and you start talking about movable type, know that this is not an idea that begins in Europe. A lot of times I've seen that people say that the uh, Gutenberg press was the first time that people used movable type or began to or were able to create this sort of uh, idea. But this idea has been used throughout the world. Asian countries, most notably China, and oftentimes Japan, have used movable type at different points, except the language. The characters in Asian languages are a lot harder to put in movable type because there's so many different ones. There's a lot of different context that is lost uh, uh, throughout the movable press. So it was never really practical for Chinese dynasty, and so that is why they did not use this in a mass scale. But they did have this technology before, and this technology probably made its way through the Silk Road or through Mediterranean trade throughout the centuries, and people knew about it. It's just during the Renaissance, people are finding a lot of these old ideas and making them new again, and so this is what happens with things like the movable press. So just that note. And so with art, with philosophy and literature, you start seeing you start seeing the winds of change move through through Europe. Uh, Money begins to move through as people begin to reclaim the cities, as more as the 100 Years' War ends and more people are living in peace and prosperity. By 1500, you start seeing the population return back to what it was at the beginning of the 14th century. So you are seeing things begin to return to normal. And so with all of this comes um, this new political rebirth. So you have a political renaissance. In Italy, you have um, Milan, Florence, Venice, um, beginning to create these strong centralized states. You're starting to see them sort of make a lot of money and not really need to come together. So the Italian states remain uh, separate. There is no Italy yet. There's no central Italy because they don't need to be. Each of these city states is strong in and of themselves and doesn't need to move into a centralized government that they will need later on. And so, because of the wealth, because of the fact that the Italian states were the center of the Renaissance, they don't come together. So, you don't have a unified Italy. You don't really have the resurgence of Rome either. Venice, Genoa, Milan, and Naples, especially, have a lot more influence than Rome does when it comes to political affairs. However, in Europe, as the intellectual and artistic renaissance move a lot of money through there, you begin to see the beginnings of what will become the modern state. In France, you have the beginnings of people using the government using a taille, or a permanent tax on the poor. You have the first of these income taxes, and the only people that really pay these taxes are the poor, or those that can't that really can't afford to pay. And so the beginning of the French aristocracy is built upon the backs of the poor, and in no way will this end poorly for the French. More foreshadowing. And in England, because they are late to the party, they are able to actually have a strong central monarch and a strong central government even before the riches of the Renaissance come in. And so the strong monarch begins to eye the continent, begins to become a patron of the art. And the English Renaissance actually begins much later than the continental Renaissance, but you do see the beginning of a strong central king. And so, because one of the things that I feel is that because the English crown was so late to adopt the Renaissance ideals, this Catholic Church thought didn't really invade itself into England like it did into the hearts and minds of the people in continental Europe. And so, by the end, here in 1500, you also have Spain with a strong monarchy and a very affluent affluent king and queen that are looking to spend a lot of money. And this is where Ferdinand and Isabella will basically entertain any sort of notions of ideas, even if it is an idea that's crazy as let's sail west in the Atlantic Ocean. More foreshadowing here. So even though Western Europe is benefiting from the Renaissance, a lot of it doesn't trickle into Central and Eastern Europe, which will be a recurring theme here, especially in this first part of our class. The Holy Roman Empire, which we'll get more into in the coming weeks, failed to develop a strong monarchy. Uh, with the Holy Roman Emperor, you had a very weak king that was beholden to a lot of other people. And so, because of this, what will become Germany becomes hundreds of virtually independent states. A lot of different landed gentry are able to wrest some control away from the Holy Roman Emperor, leaving the Confederation basically at the mercy of the Austro-Hungarians, uh, Prussians, and some of the northern northern kingdoms, and so you have a very loose confederation of different landed nobility. And so the Holy Roman Empire is never really able to take advantage of this uh, Renaissance riches because they have to spread it out over so many different people. And so, even in Eastern Europe, it's even worse because rulers struggle to achieve even some sort of dominion. You still had the threat of nomadic tribes coming in. You had these different religions that are troubling the area because you don't have this strong Catholic kingdom. You have a pretty weak Catholic kingdom along with a strong um, uh, Eastern Orthodox Church and a very strong presence from Islam, and so all of these religious differences cause trouble in the area, making it so that it's not very conducive to trade. And if it's not conducive to trade, it's not going to be conducive to these ideas coming in through. And so Eastern Europe suffers from these issues and doesn't really benefit from the Renaissance. And that's one of those things that I said from the beginning. It's not a universal Renaissance thing. However, one of the things that does happen is that Moscow rises to prominence. The Mongols are defeated by the new Rus state, and so this Russian state, is born, and the Eastern Orthodox Church becomes more centered in in Russia, what it will become Russia, and this centralization of power, along with the added authority of the formerly Greek Orthodox Church, the Eastern Orthodox Church, uh, allows the new ruler of the Rus to proclaim himself the new Caesar or the Czar. And so we get to the point where we look at the impact of the Renaissance, what the Renaissance does for Europe, and the impact of the Renaissance is severalfold because Europe becomes the center of the world. Europe becomes this force that has a lot of money, that has a lot of ambition, and European merchants begin to travel more to Asia and Africa as they are able to spread the goods and begin to move out into the coast. We'll look at in a couple weeks. We will see that European merchants and European countries begin to go around Africa. They begin to trade into the Spice Islands of Asia, and they begin to bring back more goods from Asia and Africa. And they begin to see that maybe they don't need to be paying people for this. Maybe if they just took over, they could control the trade themselves, and you start getting these ideas. The Renaissance then is going to open the door for overseas journeys and overseas exploration. You're going to see that the Renaissance gives a lot of money and a lot of technological advancements, and so you're seeing the opening of the world to Europe. And so there's this interest in the possibility of reaching Asia by sea. For the most part, the Mediterranean has been the only way that you could get into Western Asia, and they want to make it towards East Asia. And so, going around the Cape of Africa here and making it into this section of Asia becomes um, much more of a cause that they're willing to take. They're looking to find precious metals and spices of the East, and so they're looking to make more money and trade even more. These European merchant class has basically opened up Europe to the rest of the world, and they're no longer wanting to pay the middleman, and we'll talk more about that later. They don't want to pay this middleman to give them these metals and spices of East. They want to take it for themselves, and so they begin to look for ways to finding all of these precious metals, gold, diamonds, silver, etc., and all the spices in the East. And then there's also this genuine desire to convert the quote unquote heathens to Christianity. There is this, the church begins to basically piggyback onto merchants and begins to send out missionaries and send out people to convert those that live in Asia and Africa to Christianity, so to Catholicism. And you'll start seeing this more and more, especially as the church begins to change and things begin to evolve. And so this is the impact that the Renaissance has: the money, the technology, the philosophy of getting out there, of spreading the word, begins to motivate Europeans. Europeans have just suffered through, over a century of plague, famine, war, death. All the four horsemen of the apocalypse are there. And so now they have begun to make money, begun to rediscover their philosophical roots, and now they're ready to move out into the world. And this is what the Renaissance does. However, between when the Renaissance ends and when exploration becomes much more prevalent, there's going to be a big event that happens that changes the Western world, and that is the Reformation.